Hey everyone, we're working hard to get our first 1,000 subscribers, sign up and you won't regret it. The first time I realized my marriage had turned into a performance, it happened under string lights. It was a backyard party at my friend's place, one of those suburban, we're still young nights where everyone drinks craft beer and pretends their life isn't held together by calendar reminders and credit card autopay. Somebody had a speaker going. Somebody had a fire pit. Somebody's kid was asleep inside, and the adults were loud enough to prove they still mattered. My wife and I arrived late because she'd insisted on changing twice. That should have been my first warning. Not the changing. The reason. She said she wanted to look nice for photos, but she wasn't looking at herself in the mirror. She was checking how I reacted. Like I was an audience she needed to manage. I'm going to call my wife Vanessa. And my friend? Trevor. Trevor and I had been tight since college. Same degree, same first job, same dumb jokes that still made us laugh too hard. We weren't the kind of friends who said sentimental stuff. We were the kind who helped each other move and never kept score. Trevor was also the guy everyone liked. He had that easy energy, confident without trying. The guy who could show up in a wrinkled shirt and still look like he belonged on a billboard. Vanessa used to roll her eyes at him. Then, somewhere along the line, the eye rolls became smiles. I noticed it, of course. I'm not blind. But I told myself it was nothing because the alternative was uglier, that my wife felt more alive around my best friend than she did around me. At the party, Trevor greeted us like always. Big handshake for me, quick hug for Vanessa. Except the hug wasn't quick. It was the kind of hug you don't do unless you've rehearsed it. They separated and she laughed at something he said, even though I didn't hear a joke. It was like her body already knew how to respond before her brain got the words. I tried to let it roll off. That night was supposed to be a reset. We'd been arguing over nothing for months. Money. Chores. The way I worked late. The way she scrolled her phone at dinner like she was waiting for a better life to load. So I did what I always did. I made it smooth. I stayed polite. I kept the peace. We drifted through the crowd, smiling, pretending. People asked about work. People asked about travel plans. People made those jokes married couples make when they're trying to convince everyone they're fine. Then someone suggested a party game. It started as a joke. One of those, who would you rather, things, light, dumb, built for laughing. Someone had a deck of cards. Someone had tequila. It was predictable. And that's what made what happened next feel so unreal. The card pulled was something like, if you were stranded somewhere and could only have one person with you, who would you choose? It went around in a circle. People answered with their partners, their siblings, their moms. Everyone laughed, clapped, teased. When it got to Vanessa, she didn't even hesitate. She leaned back in her chair, looked at Trevor, and said, loud enough for the whole backyard to hear, honestly? Him. There was a beat of silence that didn't belong at a party. Then a few people laughed, but it wasn't real laughter. It was the kind people use to fill a void before it swallows them. Someone said something like, oh, like it was spicy and fun. Someone else said, savage. Trevor froze like he hadn't expected her to be that bold. But his face did something, this tiny shift, like he enjoyed it more than he should. And Vanessa, she watched me. Not with guilt. With curiosity. Like she wanted to see what I'd do. I felt heat rise into my neck. My chest tightened. My brain did that thing where it tries to protect you by making everything slow and distant. I could have snapped. I could have embarrassed her back. I could have stormed out. Instead, I smiled. A calm, polite smile. The kind of smile men learn when they realize anger only makes them look weak in public. Fair, I said, like it was a joke. Trevor's fun. I can't compete with fun. The laughter returned, relieved. People moved on. The moment got filed under party drama, not marriage collapse. But inside me something clicked into place. Not rage. Clarity. Because here was the thing, Vanessa didn't just disrespect me. She did it strategically. She did it in front of witnesses. She did it in a way that made me look like the uptight one if I reacted. And that meant this wasn't an accident. This was a test. I watched the rest of the party like I was outside my own body. I noticed every time her hand found Trevor's arm. Every time she laughed too loud at his words. Every time she turned her back to me like I was furniture. Trevor, for his part, played the charming friend. He didn't cross any obvious lines. That's what made it worse. He stayed just barely on the safe side of things, like he knew exactly where the cameras were. When we finally left, Vanessa didn't apologize. She didn't even bring it up. In the car, she stared out the window, scrolling on her phone, the screen lighting her face in little flashes. I kept my hand steady on the wheel and asked, as casually as I could, so, you meant that? She shrugged. It was a game. I nodded like I accepted it. But I didn't. Because a game doesn't explain the way she looked at him. Or the way she looked at me after. At home, she went straight to the shower. She left her phone on the kitchen counter. And I stood there, staring at it, like it was a bomb. I'd never gone through her phone before. Not once. I always thought if you needed to, the relationship was already dead. But then I remembered her smile in that backyard. The curiosity. The confidence. And I realized something else, she wasn't afraid of me finding out. Which meant she thought she'd already won. I didn't touch her phone. Not yet. Instead, I walked into my office, shut the door, opened my laptop, and did something I hadn't done in a long time. I pulled up our shared accounts. Every bank statement. Every credit card. Every payment history. Because if someone is willing to humiliate you in public, they're not just cheating in their heart. They're rearranging your life behind your back. And I wanted to know exactly what they'd moved. By midnight, I found the first thing that didn't make sense. A transfer I didn't recognize. Not huge. Not enough to trigger alarms. But consistent. Every week. Same amount. Same day. And the recipient wasn't a store or a utility company. It was a person. A name I didn't know. I stared at it until my eyes burned. Then I copied the name, opened a new tab, and searched it. The first result made my stomach drop. Because it wasn't just some random person. It was connected to Trevor. And the moment Vanessa walked out of the shower, humming like nothing had happened, I realized this wasn't going to be a messy fight. It was going to be a quiet war. And the next move was mine. I didn't confront her. That's the part people don't understand when I tell this story. They assume the moment you find something suspicious, you demand answers. You slam doors. You spill truth like gasoline and light a match. But I wasn't trying to win an argument. I was trying to win my life back. So I went cold. Not cruel. Not silent treatment dramatic. Just steady. Normal. Predictable. Vanessa thrives on reaction. If you've ever lived with someone like that, you know the pattern. They push, they poke, they provoke, then they act like you're the unstable one for reacting. So I gave her nothing. I smiled. I made coffee. I asked about her day. I kissed her forehead like we were still a team. And then I started collecting facts. The name from the transfer led me to a small LLC. The kind people create to move money around without it looking personal. The registered agent was a generic service. The address was a rented mailbox. But the paperwork listed a contact email. And that email, after a little digging, connected to a social media account that hadn't been used in months. The account belonged to Trevor's older cousin, some guy who always showed up at our parties and acted like he was between big things. I didn't know him well. But I knew enough to understand what this was, a funnel. Vanessa was moving money. Not a lot at once. Just enough to stay invisible. And it was being routed through someone in Trevor's orbit. The question wasn't if. It was why. I checked our credit card statements. There were charges that lined up with nights she claimed she was out with friends. Restaurants I'd never been to. A hotel charge that was refunded the next day. Refunded, but still suspicious. Then I noticed something else, a new line of credit inquiry from 2 months ago. I hadn't applied for anything. Which meant she had. Or someone had, using our information. I felt something icy settle into my gut. Infidelity hurts. But financial betrayal? That's a different category. That's not, I'm unhappy. That's, I'm planning my exit, and I'm taking you with me. I started paying attention to details I used to ignore. Her sudden interest in organizing paperwork. Her casual questions about my work, specifically about bonuses and stock vesting dates. Her habit of taking phone calls in the garage. Not whispering. Just angled away, like she didn't want me in the frame. And Trevor? Trevor started texting more. Not just me. Both of us. Group texts. Stuff like, we should all get dinner soon. Miss you guys. Let's do something next weekend. It was the kind of messaging that creates a paper trail of innocence. If it blew up later, they could point to those texts and say, see? We were normal. He was just paranoid. I didn't reply much. Just enough to look engaged. During the day, I did my job. I took calls. I sat in meetings like a normal person. At night, I became a different version of myself. I pulled our full credit report. And that's when I found the second thing that made my hands shake. A credit card had been opened in my name. Not a joint one. Mine. The balance was small, but the pattern wasn't. There were purchases tied to travel, rideshares, flights, deposits. It was like someone was preparing to be mobile. I printed everything. Old school. Paper copies. Dates highlighted. Because if there's one lesson I learned from watching people get destroyed in divorces, it's this: screenshots are easy to lose. Paper doesn't vanish. On the 4th day after the party, Vanessa did something almost funny, if it hadn't been my life. She brought up counseling. Not because she felt guilty. Because she could tell I was slipping out of her control. She sat across from me at dinner, swirling her wine, and said something like, "Maybe we should talk to someone. We've been off." I nodded. "Sure. If that's what you want." She looked relieved. Like she'd just secured the narrative. "We tried. He didn't cooperate. It's sad, but what could I do?" Then she added, too casually, "Trevor knows a great therapist." Of course he did. That night, after she fell asleep, I opened my laptop again and looked up Trevor's company. Trevor wasn't just an employee. He was a partner at a mid-sized firm, nothing glamorous, but profitable. He had access to client funds, contracts, internal accounts. And as I kept digging, I noticed something that didn't fit his easy charm persona. A lawsuit. 2 years ago. Settled quietly. A former client had accused the firm of misrepresentation and misuse of escrow funds. Trevor's name wasn't on the filing front and center. But it appeared in the documents. Not as a defendant. As a witness. That's when I started to see the shape of it. Trevor wasn't just having an affair. Trevor was the kind of guy who used charm like a tool. Who liked control. Who liked leverage. And Vanessa, she'd fallen for it. Or joined it. Maybe both. On day 6, I finally went through her phone. I didn't do it like a jealous husband. I did it like an accountant. I didn't read every message. I searched for patterns, keywords, dates, names. And I found what I needed in less than 3 minutes. A thread with Trevor that wasn't saved under Trevor. It was saved under a woman's name. A name Vanessa and I both knew from years ago, someone she claimed she couldn't stand. The messages weren't graphic. They were careful. But they were intimate in the way that matters. Scheduling. Planning. Inside jokes that didn't include me. And then there was the message that made my throat go dry. Trevor had sent, "Once it's signed, there's no going back." Vanessa replied, "I know. I'm ready. I just need you to promise you'll be there when he finds out. No going back. Signed. Promise you'll be there." That wasn't a fling. That was a plan. I set the phone down exactly where I found it. Then I walked into my office and pulled out the folder I'd been building all week. And I called the one person I hadn't talked to yet. Not a friend. Not family. A lawyer. Because I didn't need comfort. I needed strategy. And when the lawyer answered and I started explaining what I'd found, she interrupted me and asked one question. "Do you have access to the documents she wants you to sign?" I swallowed. Because yes. Vanessa had left a folder on the kitchen table that morning, like it was no big deal. She'd called it paperwork to simplify things. I hadn't opened it. I walked out, grabbed the folder, brought it back, and opened it for the first time. The top page wasn't counseling information. It wasn't budgeting. It wasn't simplifying. It was a legal document. With my name on it. A form that would authorize a transfer of a property interest. A property my uncle left me 2 years ago. A property Vanessa had suddenly started asking about last month. And at the bottom of the page was a blank line. For my signature. I stared at it, hearing Trevor's text in my head, "Once it's signed," and realized the week was almost over. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was spiraling. I was past that. It was the opposite. My mind felt too clear. Like everything had finally snapped into focus, and now my body was just trying to catch up. The property they wanted wasn't a mansion. It wasn't some fantasy beach house. It was a small rental duplex my uncle left me in his will, 2 units, steady tenants, a dependable monthly income. It was also the one thing in my life that didn't depend on my job. Which made it the perfect target. Vanessa had always called it, "your uncle's little project," like it was cute. Like it didn't matter. But lately she'd been unusually interested in the details. Now I knew why. Trevor wanted leverage. Vanessa wanted an exit. The duplex was the bridge between them. So I did something that probably sounds insane if you've never been cornered by people who think you're stupid. I agreed to sign. Not the document they gave me. A different one. The lawyer helped me draft a version that looked nearly identical to the untrained eye but did the opposite of what Vanessa thought it did. It didn't transfer ownership to her. It created a temporary trust structure that locked the asset down unless both parties appeared in person with notarized identification. It was like turning a house into a safe deposit box. I could still manage it. Still collect income. Still maintain it. But she couldn't touch it without me. And if she tried, there'd be a record. I also took the credit card evidence and the LLC trail to the lawyer. She told me something I'll never forget. "You're not dealing with a marriage problem. You're dealing with a fraud problem." That changed how I moved. On the 7th day after the party, the day Vanessa had been acting strangely sweet all morning, Trevor invited us to dinner. A make-up dinner, he called it. Like the humiliation in the backyard was a joke that needed closure. Vanessa got dressed like she was going to a gala. I wore the same jacket I wore to work. At dinner, Trevor was in peak form. Warm, friendly, generous. He talked about the future like he was narrating a commercial, vacations, goals, new chapters. Vanessa kept touching my arm, like she was reminding herself I was still the husband she needed to move. At some point, Trevor excused himself to take a call. Vanessa leaned in and said, softly, I want us to stop being tense. I want us to be solid again. I looked at her and realized I didn't even recognize her face anymore. It wasn't that she'd changed physically. It was that I finally saw the person behind the smile. I nodded. Me too. She pulled the folder from her purse like she'd been waiting for the right moment. If you sign this tonight, it'll take a weight off my mind. It's just to streamline stuff. For us. For us. That phrase almost made me laugh. I took the folder, flipped through it slowly, like I was considering it. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. Trevor returned and sat down, eyes flicking to the folder like he couldn't help himself. Vanessa handed me a pen. I signed. Not with a flourish. Not with drama. Just signed. Trevor's face did a tiny thing, relief, satisfaction, hunger. He tried to hide it by taking a sip of his drink, but I saw it. Vanessa exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. Then Trevor said, to fresh starts. We clinked glasses. And I smiled. Because they thought the game was over. But the signature wasn't the end. It was the bait. The next morning, I set the second part of my plan in motion. I called the credit card company and flagged the account opened in my name. I filed a fraud report. I requested full transaction logs and delivery addresses. Then I went to my bank and did something Vanessa never expected. I separated our finances. Not by draining accounts. Not by punishing her. I did it cleanly, legally, with documentation and notice, the way someone does when they're preparing for a storm and boarding up windows before the rain hits. I also called the tenants at the duplex, not to scare them, but to confirm something important. Whether anyone had contacted them recently about changes or inspections. One of them paused and said, actually, yeah. A guy came by last week. Said he was a friend of the owner. Asked about the lease and if we plan to renew. My stomach stayed calm, but my brain lit up. That guy wasn't a contractor. That guy was Trevor's cousin. The LLC guy. They'd been scouting the asset before they even got the signature. Which meant they were moving fast. Good. So did I. By afternoon, my lawyer filed a petition for a protective order on the asset and prepared divorce paperwork on my terms. Not because I wanted revenge on paper, but because timing matters. Whoever files first controls the tempo. That night, Vanessa came home glowing. She kissed me too long. She asked about my day too sweetly. She cooked dinner like we were in a movie about reconciliation. And while she moved around the kitchen, her phone lit up on the counter. A message preview from the fake contact name. I didn't need to touch it. The preview said, tomorrow. We tell him tomorrow. So that was the plan. They were going to reveal the affair after securing the signature. They'd paint it as falling in love. They'd act like honesty cleans betrayal. They'd cry. They'd ask for understanding. And while I was stunned, they'd move money and property. I went to bed early. Vanessa stayed up texting, smiling at her screen. In the morning, she made coffee and said we should talk tonight. I nodded like I was nervous. I wasn't. At work, I requested an afternoon off. I drove to the duplex. I sat in my car across the street and watched. And right on schedule, a familiar car pulled up. Trevor's. He got out, looked around like he owned the place, and walked toward the front door. Like it was already his. I took a photo. Then another. And as he raised his hand to knock, my phone buzzed with a call from my lawyer. She said, we just got confirmation. The document you signed locked the property down. I watched Trevor, standing there, confident and clueless. Then my lawyer added, also, the fraud report triggered something. There's another account in your name. And it's tied to a business Trevor's involved with. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about my marriage. This was about Trevor using my identity for something bigger than a duplex. And Vanessa was either a victim or a partner. I ended the call, got out of the car, and walked toward Trevor as calmly as if I was just there for a routine inspection. He turned, surprised, smile ready. But the smile faded when he saw my face. Because I wasn't confused. I wasn't angry. I was prepared. And that's when he said my name like a warning. Like he knew, too late, that he'd misjudged me. Trevor tried to act casual. He spread his hands a little, like the whole thing was a misunderstanding. Like he'd just happened to be in the neighborhood and thought he'd check in. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I just asked, why are you here? His eyes darted to the building, then back to me. Vanessa said you were thinking about selling. I figured I'd take a look. You know, help you out. Help you out. That's what predators call it when they're about to take something. I nodded slowly. Interesting. Because I didn't tell Vanessa I was selling. Trevor's jaw tightened. He was good at charm, but charm only works when the other person wants to believe. And I didn't. I walked past him, unlocked the front gate, and did what I came to do. I met the tenants, checked the property, made sure nobody had tampered with anything. Trevor hovered like a man waiting for permission he didn't deserve. When I finished, I turned back to him and said, "You should go." His face hardened. "You're making this weird." I almost smiled at that. Because when people get caught, they always accuse you of being the problem. I took out my phone and showed him the photo I'd taken of him walking up to the house. Then the next one. His eyes narrowed. "You're documenting me?" he said, like I'd insulted him. I looked at him and said, "Yes." That was all. No speech. No threats. Just yes. Trevor swallowed and stepped back. "Look, man, whatever Vanessa told you." I held up my hand. "Stop." He froze. Because this wasn't our usual dynamic. This wasn't me playing along. This wasn't me laughing at his jokes. This was me ending the friendship without giving him closure. I got in my car and drove straight home. Vanessa was waiting. She had candles lit. Music low. She was dressed in that careful way that says, "I'm about to rewrite the story." She smiled as I walked in, then paused when she saw the folder in my hand. "You signed," she said, relief flooding her voice. I set the folder on the table. "Yeah." Her shoulders relaxed. And that's when she did it. She delivered her truth like she'd rehearsed it. She started talking about feelings and distance and how things happened. How she never wanted to hurt me. How she tried. How I'd been busy. How Trevor understood her. She didn't use crude words. She didn't need to. She spoke like someone making a case to a jury. And then she said it. The line she thought would make her look noble. She said she was choosing him. Not in anger. In calm certainty. Like she expected me to collapse, beg, scream. I listened until she finished. Then I said, "He came to the duplex today." Her face flickered. "What?" He knocked on the door like it was already his. Vanessa's lips parted slightly, but she recovered fast. "He was just checking." I cut her off. "No." I pulled out the printed paperwork. Not the one she gave me. The one I signed. I placed it in front of her and watched her eyes scan the lines. Her expression changed as comprehension hit. Confusion first. Then panic. Because she realized she didn't understand what she'd made me sign. "What is this?" she whispered. I sat down across from her like a stranger in my own kitchen. "It's a lock. The property can't be transferred without me physically present and a notarized identity check." Vanessa went pale. "You tricked me." I shrugged. "You tried to steal from me." She stared at me, shocked, like she couldn't believe I'd said the word out loud. Then she grabbed her phone and started texting. Fast. I didn't stop her. Because I wanted what was coming. 10 minutes later, Trevor pulled into our driveway like he still had a key to my life. He barged in without knocking. And when he saw me sitting calmly at the table, his confidence faltered. Vanessa started talking, fast, desperate, about misunderstandings, about how this was supposed to be simple. Trevor tried to regain control by turning it on me. "You're overreacting," he said. "This doesn't have to get ugly." That's when I placed the second stack of papers on the table. The fraud report confirmations. The credit report. The transaction logs with the LLC trail. The addresses where items were shipped. A timeline. And then the final page, something my lawyer had advised me to request through a formal inquiry that morning. It was a notice from a financial institution that a business account connected to Trevor's firm had activity flagged, activity that overlapped with the identity accounts opened under my name. Trevor stared at it like he'd been punched. Vanessa looked between us, trying to understand. I said, "This is bigger than an affair." Trevor's mouth opened, but no words came out. Because he knew what it meant. If I turned this over to the right people, it wouldn't just be gossip and divorce court. It would be investigations. Professional consequences. Criminal consequences. Vanessa's hands started shaking. "Wait. What did you?" Trevor finally spoke, softer now, almost pleading. "Man, don't do this." There it was. The begging. Not romantic begging. Not emotional begging. Survival begging. Vanessa looked at me with sudden fear, like she'd just realized she'd tied herself to something rotten. She whispered, "Please. We can fix this." I leaned back and let the silence sit. Because the satisfying part of this story isn't that I yelled. It's that I didn't have to. I had leverage. Clean, documented leverage. I told them the truth. I wasn't going to forgive them and go back to pretending. I was filing for divorce. I was freezing joint access to anything tied to my name. And I was handing everything to my lawyer to decide how far it needed to go. Trevor's face went tight. "You'd really ruin me over this?" I said. "You ruined yourself. You just assumed I'd stay quiet." Vanessa started crying, real crying now, not performance crying. But even that didn't move me. Because crying doesn't undo planning. Here's the earned ending. I didn't blast them on social media. I didn't call their parents. I didn't start screaming in the driveway. I let the system do what it's built to do when someone brings evidence. Trevor lost his position within weeks. There were internal reviews. Quiet meetings. People suddenly not returning his calls. Vanessa tried to backpedal hard. She told mutual friends she'd been manipulated. She said she never intended to steal. But the bank records didn't care about her intentions. Neither did the court. The duplex stayed mine. Locked down, protected. The fraudulent accounts were closed and documented. The divorce settlement wasn't dramatic. It was clean. And when Vanessa and Trevor tried one last time to get me to talk, to give them closure, to forgive, I said the only thing I needed to say. No. Not shouted. Not emotional. Just, no. Because forgiveness is a gift. And they didn't ask for a gift. They tried to take.